Okay, now is the hour, so I'll call this committee of the whole meeting to order and recognise that this meeting is being held on the traditional territory of the Tofino First Nation. Can I get a motion to adopt the agenda? Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favour? Motion carried. Adoption of the minutes, the committee of the whole meeting held March the 4th, 2019.
Move adoption.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favour? None opposed? Okay, public comment on agenda items. We have one person that is signed up. That is Jarmo. Venalainen. There you go.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I wanted to come once again say that I am not making my comments and presentations and bringing information to light just to be a difficult person. I honestly am doing it in the interest of the community, because I think we all need to be aware of where we are with reference to other districts, with reference to the rest of the world out there. The thing that captured my attention is, my time in Tofino is a few years now, is initially there was a few bits and pieces, but it seems like the more I look, the more differentiated we come across as with regards to how we spend money and approach these projects. That's the message that I'm bringing forth, and I hope to bring it in a respectful way. If you feel that I am not respectful, communicate with me personally if you want. Tell me why and how. I really honestly want to bring the information to light. Actually, that's me. I bring it to light, but I want to do it in a way that produces a positive result. I don't want to be just difficult and mutter behind garbage cans and in the dark web, as you probably noticed. So that was my opening comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on, we have one delegation that's signed up from Jarmo Venalainen regarding a review of sewage treatment plants and costs in British Columbia.
Thank you, Councillors, Mayor. I'm here to talk about the wastewater treatment plant. Why? Perhaps the best answer to that question is because it appeared very suddenly. And as far as my research to date, research as in I go looking, to date it's the most expensive that I found for a community of this size. And so that puzzles me. The essence of my message is that if we're spending $60 million, then perhaps we should spend more than $100,000 to hire a single consultant to gather the information. That's one aspect of my message, but let's go through the thing.
Is it
Left or right?
working for you?
3 o'clock.
No, it's not responding.
Try it again.
No?
Yeah.
No?
direct me.
All right, next. I'll just say enter. So sewer system showed up 5,000 years ago. I was fascinated by that. That was about the time that we recorded a pit sat having been done. Next. 3,000 years ago, people separated sanitary and rainwater sewers. I mean, this goes way back. 1,000 years before the birth of Christ, they had whole systems in the cities. Next. The Romans built really complex aqueducts that we've no doubt heard about, and things were going really well until what became the Dark Ages, and all the Roman systems kind of fell apart. Next. During the Middle Ages, sewers reappeared as ditches in towns. They were open and everything was mixed together. And it was a pretty messy business. Next. Smell and nuisance became a problem in the 1700s, so they started flushing it away into rivers. Then they did a whole bunch of technology research on size of pipes and flow rates in the 1800s. Then there was it began the discussion of separating sanitary and freshwater sewers. And then the real trigger for improvement was the mid-1800s, when there was a lot of disease outbreaks and people actually started doing something about it. So they would do ground infiltration, sand filtering, and chemical treatment as early as that. They also had the patented cesspool invented to keep the stuff in all one place. That became the septic tank, which is still in use. Here's an interesting stat on the previous slide. Back then, it was actually estimated that to dilute the stuff, you only need 200 liters per second for 1,000 people. Now, that's a completely irrational number by today's standards, but it's interesting to note that millions of cities have operated with that figure. And the reason I mention that is to emphasize that Tofino really doesn't have a critical problem, because we have about 150,000 liters per second that goes through that channel. I'm not saying we shouldn't have a sewer plant, but what I'm saying is that's not a supercritical element in the scale of Canada. Next. Attitudes which persisted. So this is the kind of thing that people were thinking. It's often more equitable for the upper riparian city to discharge a sewer and then have the lower riparian city filter it. These were the kind of things people were thinking not so long ago. Less than 100 years ago. Next. What do other small towns do? They're not on an ocean, so they pretty much all use lagoons. And the lagoon is a very efficient way to do it, because if you let the bugs eat away at it, you end up with a really good finished product for a primary and secondary treatment that you can filter it and do other things afterwards. These places are now upgrading with secondary, tertiary, and even chemical extraction, because we're talking about our drugs being in there and all kinds of stuff like that that people are concerned about. Next. History in Tofino. Our solution has been dilution, which is consistent with communities that have large marine places to dump it into. We use the ocean as our bioreactor. With regards to the abruptness of the $60 million problem, there was very little discussion in the public record prior to 2014. In 2015, our infrastructure was described as well maintained and up to date. Then all of a sudden, in 2016, we identified a sewage treatment problem. And then in 2020, we need to spend $60 million to fix that problem. So my issue with this is it's the largest purchase that the district has ever made. It's the biggest commitment for me and all other taxpayers, tens of thousands of dollars in a financial commitment. It's the biggest purchase after we buy our house or car. It shows up very quickly, it's very expensive, and it's very defined. Like, if I look at the way the documents are written up, it's like the water's frozen. There are some talks about this location and that location, but really on a people time scale, when you do things in 18 months, that's not really a group discussion. Next. Here's where the info came from. B2A plan 2014. Our system is well maintained and up-to-date. Services include water, waste management, sewage treatment. So it's described as everything's okay. Next. Then all of a sudden there's a lack of waste management system a year later, 12 months later. Next. And then we get these powerful, fearful statements. We have been ordered to stop flushing untreated water. Now, that's not a comment by the district, but somebody made that comment in the news media. So what I'm saying is it just turned around, makes my head spin. So what technologies are there next? There are well in excess of 100 different ways to process poop now. Out of those, go back one. Out of those, there's about a dozen ones that are being looked at, and there was a lot of action about 10 years ago on making energy out of the poop. There was a lot of applications to the BC government and federally. Now it seems like it fizzled out, so I'm not sure exactly what happened there, but there is a public record of that activity. Next. Learnings from the past. The most important thing, this was a write-up, a study of studies. It said wastewater management techniques are developed in response to social demands or problems. So in our case, I'm not advocating that we don't need a plant. We need, but we do not have a big problem because of our ocean bioreactor. We do have a social demand, and we do have the government saying that we need to do this. Efficient technology transfer is needed. So what they also concluded is that if you were using some of the newer technology, not the bleeding edge stuff, but if you had your eye on the newer stuff, the outcome turned out better for everybody concerned. And user-friendly design methods and design tools, this is for the engineers, but the comment about economic ramification shines through quickly in these comments. It says that for a full package to work out and be sustainable, it must economically make sense. And so that's my point with what we're looking at right now. $60 million for 2,000 people doesn't economically make sense now. It's not economically going to make sense 10 years from now. And the fact that the plant is a matter of public record. The plant itself is the record. And all the other hundreds of plants in Canada is the other record, and they will always be looked at and compared. In other words, it's reality. It will exist. You can't, if it is not a good idea, if it is economically a burden, you cannot cancel it by talk. Next. Most sewage places in other places use lagoons. Incinerators have been favored. People along the ocean dump it in the ocean, like I think in BC, if I remember correctly, of the order of 15% of the communities do that simply because the ocean takes it and says it doesn't grumble. Next. There are thousands of facilities. This is from the BC record. Like the wonderful thing about the internet is you can see what got built where. That's something that's happened in the last 10 years. The internet is, if you take the time to look, you can scan through a bunch of pages here. Next. There's an annual record of everything that got built, what it was, how much it cost, who paid for it, how much the taxpayers paid. These are some of the biggest things that have been done in the last 2 years, and you'll see the numbers there, 20 million, 50 million, 35 million. So we're surpassing all of the recent stuff even before we begin building. You know, and that was a big red flag for me personally, because this is a big commitment for our community and me personally. Next. Here's some of the other projects on a federal level. There's probably 4 pages of these. And you'll see numbers in the $5 to $10 million range here. And that's everybody out there. Drinking water, wastewater. You can run through these. So what did we do? Well, here's our plan. Next. So the issues that I'm raising is the speed of the emergence of the problem. I'm not denying the problem. But I'm going like, oh, wait, what happened? 18 months to $60 million. The other issue I'm raising that you know, just doesn't sit right is the speed of the 3 stages of development. It's been done twice, as far as I can tell, in a matter of 12 months. And the cost...
Can I get a motion to go beyond 2 minutes?
Am I over? Sorry?
Yeah.
It's up to you guys.
Well, I'll make that
There are
motion.
2 slides left.
2.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So the other issue is the cost just skyrockets, and then this business about the biological oxygen demand versus plant cost. Now, I graduated from UBC, so I know people in the engineering department. I'm not getting any correlation on this business at all. I really don't understand it yet. In other words, if the oxygen demand is high, it doesn't mean that the plant cost immediately goes high. What it means is you have concentrated material to process, less volume, so that's not a problem. And perhaps you need to dilute it. But anyway, I'm not at the bottom of that, but it's just a comment. And then this public advisory committee, technical advisory committee, committee meetings and reports, they're very thin. And there's a technical report by a company, Opus, but there isn't really a review of the technical thing, and there's no comparison from maybe other engineers. Again, my opening comments, we're spending $60 million. Me as a taxpayer, I'm happy if you spend $3 million on studying it to get the technology right, instead of just going, okay, that's what that guy said, it must be good. The other thing that was kind of weird was the bidding. As far as I'm aware, there was a newspaper ad to get the bidding on contract on the engineering. We didn't go to any of the government bidding sites. It just puzzles me why. Next. So there's lots of government sites. Buy and sell GC, bidding go, bids and tenders, Mercs, and a whole pile of other places. It seems we felt comfortable undertaking a $60 million project with just a tiny little 3x4 inch newspaper ad. Weird. Next. The final lesson is that you need to take together the costs, the ideas, the sustainability, and all the other elements to make it work. Next. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
Yes, thanks.
Not really a question. I just want to respectfully disagree with probably about half of what you said. And I appreciate that you've done a lot of research and you've looked on the internet and seen a lot of records. But I think that if you had the opportunity to sit down and really understand how the project was built and designed, and to see that it was correctly put up on bid sites and all of that work was done, I want to say I have a lot of confidence in our staff, and I think they've done an excellent job, and council's worked really hard to bring us to this point. In no way does that mean that I agree that $60 million or $57 million is acceptable for a community of this size. In fact, I think it's appalling. It's a terrible thing, but I'm not going to knock the work that was done to get us to this point. I don't think that's what you're intending on doing, but I just need to say, to feel better about going home tonight, that I just don't agree with much of what you said.
I appreciate that. I mean, I come to my own conclusions. I'm a layman. I don't know sewer systems. This is me reading about it, but I would say that there's a part here where you communicate to the public in these projects when they're so big. If that information was clearly visible, what you're saying, then I wouldn't be here talking about it not being right or being right like that. I mean, you know, when you're spending $30,000 in the name of every resident, I think it's contingent to make that aspect of the information visible and understandable.
It's a very serious matter, and I think if you've looked at and I'm sure you have, the Tofino Liquid Waste Management Plan website that details all of the communications we've had to the public. There's a balance that's made in the way that we communicate to the public and the level of detailed information, and we don't put every last bit on there, but I'm confident that good work has been done behind it. So.
All right, well, we can
agree to disagree.
There we go. All right, thank you.
Thank you,
Okay,
Mr. Chair.
thanks, Jarmo. I would encourage you to contact staff if you have any specific questions. I'm sure they would love to help.
Sure, okay.
Councillor McMaster, just as a clarification, mostly for council. For those who don't know, I came on council about 11 years ago, and the work on the liquid waste management plan, which was already at that point required by the federal government, had been drafted by our public works and engineer and so forth and submitted to the province and rejected. So at that time they were looking at about a $20 million plant, I think, but at any rate there were some details that had to be done. And when the next council of the day was in a search for the CAO, right off the bat it was liquid waste treatment plant. We need to grapple with this and get to a solution. So as the mayor said, I'm absolutely appalled at the price tag of it and have no doubt that this community cannot and will not pay that kind of money. And, you know, it's going to be a process. But in case you had this idea that it just came up and hasn't, it was very much on the books and far along in that iteration when I came on council 11 years ago.
I guess from my point of view, that's one of the things that has happened is with the internet now. There's a public record whether you want it or not, and perhaps 10 years ago it was the other world where there wasn't. And so I guess you can take two sides to that. That's a good thing. But if you're trying to do something and change your mind later, the record will be there. So it kind of constrains you as well. It demands better work.
I'll just make one comment too, that the mandate from the federal government is well known, goes back approximately 20 years. And that's when we first started to work on the sewage, the liquid waste management plan. And the first iteration didn't fly, as Councillor Barrett pointed out. And it had to be picked up and started again. And I think also that you're missing one point, that it's not just a plan, it's also a composting facility and an upgrade to all the lines, and probably decommissioning some equipment as well that's currently in place, including an outfall. So I think that by picturing it only as a plant, you're missing a lot of the project. So and I also agree that the price is ridiculous, but we've seen what has come from construction prices lately, and wish we had been able to build it when it was a $20,000 price tag. Some of the other alternative sewage treatment processes that you pointed out have been explored, don't work in our climate. For instance, open pools without consistent rainfall that can be controlled don't work on the West Coast. And there's also the land base to be considered. We don't have big areas of flat land like Dawson Creek does to put in a cheap plant. We could put in a cheap plant if we had large areas of flat land and an even climate. So I think a lot of the points that you make have been looked into, have been dismissed, and here we are. So
yeah, I guess that's my point though, is that what I wouldn't be here had I seen a public record of that having happened in a way where the results and the considerations were visible. With regards to open lagoons, Port Alberta uses an open lagoon and always has, and I think they have about as much rain as we do.
also Ucluelet does, and they'll be in a process of upgrading before long to a modern standard. I don't think that would be acceptable anymore to put those kind of treatments in place.
Yeah, I guess that's the essence of my message is whatever it's done, it needs a lot of attention, time, money, and the results need to be publicly visible. I guess that's the essence of my message.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, correspondence. We have correspondence from Crown agencies and Board Resourcing Office regarding a governing in the public interest foundational training for new board members at the conference.
This is actually a mistake. I apologize. Elise and we talked this morning, but this was correspondence that was sent to me in my capacity as the chair of the Island Coastal Economic Trust. And it's not training that's for elected officials. It's not training for councillors. It's training for people who sit on boards like ICE-T or ICBC and all that. So
it's for you.
Huh?
It's for you.
Yeah, it's not even for me. So it's for the provincial appointees that sit on the board.
Okay.
So we can ignore it. Sorry about that.
Moving on.
Moving on.
Now into the report section, we have a spring update from the Tofino Housing Corporation. From Ian Scott, Executive Director.
The part that allows him to control the clicker is in my computer upstairs, so if you wouldn't mind just taking a 1 minute break while I get that.
Okay.
We'll take a 2-minute recess. You could just put that in the agenda to throw me off.
2 minutes, yeah.
I read Tom a lot.
April Fools.
I was like reading it and read it again, and then I looked up a bunch of things on the internet, and I was like, I just don't even know who this is.
So this is a bunch of crap.
Oh, yeah. You're leaving for me.
We could discuss that.
So is this the last agenda item? Or
No,
you're dismissed?
no,
Two more.
saving the best till last.
What?
I'm going to leave midway through your presentation.
Okay, no problem.
You can go.
You can go now if you want.
Well,
I won't be offended.
yeah, no, I'm interested.
Okay. Yeah. There we go.
Okay.
Good evening, folks. Second time that I've seen, I think everyone was here when I was here at the beginning of January, asking for the district to support our proposal development funding loan application and a loan guarantee. That process is ongoing. You did pass the first readings of the bylaw, and that will be back to you once the municipal inspector has approved the bylaw. So appreciate that, and that we're continuing to move on forward. But I thought, rather than just address the report, or the winter report that I put together, I thought I'd just take a little bit of a step back, since I haven't had a chance to present to each of you as the process has gone on since I started with the Housing Corporation in June of 2017. So I'm just going to go backwards before going forwards, if that is okay. Just take a bit of a liberty there. So our purpose, the Housing Corporation, providing attainable and affordable housing for residents and employees of Tofino. In November of 2017, we held a housing forum, and this was the approach that we'd identified, which was three kind of key things. One, making sure we understand the supply and demand dynamics, figuring out what was the business model and business case for the Tofino Housing Corporation. How were we going to conduct our activities? Looking at building 35 to 50 units of housing on DL 114 and a Sharp Road project, with a target that we would have our first project under construction in 2019. We're not going. There's still a possibility that Sharp Road will start this fall, but I doubt it. I think we're looking at a 2020 start to Sharp Road, and given where the funding is at the provincial level, DL 114 is probably the following year, or another 18 months later, just depending on how things play out. So Housing Corporation, the corporation, the District of Tofino, are the only single shareholder of the corporation. This is really a unique setup. There are very few places in BC, in Canada, in the States, even internationally, where a local government is the owner of a company that is trying to provide affordable and attainable housing. The reality is, developing affordable and attainable housing is a non-profit venture at very best, and what that means is only if subsidized. There is no market approach that you can deliver below market housing and not lose money, and it is getting, unfortunately, worse year after year. Our costs keep going up. It used to be, in my opinion, this is Ian speaking from the pulpit, that land was a big problem, and land was what was holding a lot of projects back. I think increasingly it's construction costs that are holding people back in comparison to what people are making on their income. So we have high costs, low wages, and we just can't make that work. So we have a market failure. There's really limited seed funding, so there's really little ways to get a housing corporation like this going. There wasn't a grant we could go after. And the district used its remaining affordable housing reserves to start up the corporation, and that was a total of $85,000. Compare that to the Whistler Housing Corporation. When they got started, had about $5 to $6 million in their kitty. If you look at the Capital Regional District housing setup, they also had multi-millions of dollars. Attainable Homes Calgary, I think, started with about 10 or 11 million. So we started on shoestring budget at best. Even calling it a shoestring is a little bit of a stretch. So really little, very little money. At the time, kind of not great prospects for future funding, although both the provincial and federal government were sending signals that money was coming to affordable housing in communities in Canada. This is a remote place, high cost of development. There's also a smaller talent pool in whatever area I look. Lawyers, surveyors, engineers, architects, people who can run housing corporations. It's a small talent pool. You have a housing challenge, which makes it difficult to recruit even staff for the district, let alone staff for the restaurants. So you have a locational challenge as well as a small tax base that has to pay for things like sewer and other things. So you're not a rich community in that respect. And compared to a place like Whistler, Whistler is a success story in part because they made a decision pretty early on in their development boom to start collecting money from developers to really support their housing corporation. And that decision was made pretty late here in Tofino and at a much more kind of modest place. And I know now from being here for a few years, there's a feeling that Tofino's kind of, bursting at its, it seems a little bit, and concerns about how much more beds and things you want in this community in terms of how many more visitors you want. And so there's not a great opportunity to get developers to help pay for all this housing. And then of course there's a bit of a stain on the history of the corporation, which was started in 2005 and then folded without accomplishing a unit of housing. So that's where we are. So it's a unique situation and not an easy situation to solve, but we're getting there. So this is a slide I had at the Housing Forum in 2017. I'm not going to go through it, but 2017 the corporation was restored. I started in June of that year, and basically starting, why wasn't the RFP that was in 2016, why did no one respond? Why was there no private developer or nonprofit developer who responded to that RFP? And I quickly learned that TBF had come to council in the interim, the Tofino Bible Fellowship, saying that they would like to do a project on DL 114. And so quickly became apparent we couldn't both be asking funders to support pre-development work on the same piece of land. And so we decided we should work together. And we signed that MOU with them in October. In November, we had the Housing Forum, which was really a way to sort of launch the public face of our new activities and explore what people needed for housing. We got seed funding in January 2018. March of 2018, a really big success with the Rural Dividend Fund grant. We completed surveys of both employees, about employee housing, as well as housing survey of people in the community to get a better sense of need and demand. With not a lot of effort, we got over 200 responses to our housing survey. And what I find really, what I was a bit surprised by was the number of staff accommodation beds that exist in this community. My best estimate is somewhere around 800 to 850 beds, if not more, are operated by your businesses in this community, renting for around $400 to $500 a month. So you do actually have quite a pool of affordable housing, but it's not community housing, it's employee housing. So if you lose your job, you can get kicked out of your house. So the businesses in this community have done a fair job of providing a significant pool beyond the few bits and pieces of housing that you have. This CoalNet Seniors, McColl operates a unit, Tofino Bible Fellowship operates a unit, and of course recently the district sold the unit at Sea Otter. And there's a few other units that the district has and other agencies that are maybe not businesses. So depending on how you count, there's 800 to 1,000 units out there, but in different ways than you may typically look at it when you first start looking at the issue. On the business case side, the corporation made a decision in 2018 that we weren't going to try to become a full-blown housing owner, operator, developer, that we were going to recruit a third-party nonprofit developer. Why did we make that decision? Simply speaking, it's a risk mitigation measure. We're not sure of where the funding is going to come from for this losing money venture. Recognizing it's probably not going to come very much from the district. And then also married with a few other things, including recruiting talent, including thinking about the regional, what's the future of housing and a housing corporation in the region, and might there be a regional approach, and rather than presupposing only a Tofino solution. So we made that decision. June 2018, we presented concept development plans for both Sharp Road and DL114 to the community, and had good responses to our preliminary concept ideas. July 2018, we had 3 nonprofit real estate developers express interest in coming to Tofino and working with the corporation. In the end, only 2 of them proceeded to an interview stage. In July of 2018, we put in a proposal for proposal development funding, or PDF funding, which is a no-interest loan system that BC Housing offers. They had initially said in December of 2017, when we put in our rural dividend fund application, yes, we can get you this funding. And then a few months later, they stopped giving out PDF funding. And it took us a while to convince them that since they'd said yes and we were using it to match our RDF funding, they needed to say yes again. They finally did. That story continues. Since, what month is it now? March of 2019, and we still don't have it. August of 2018, the THC board, we chose Catalyst Community Development Society as our preferred nonprofit partner. I think what's interesting, compared to where the corporation was when it was going through its first iteration to now, there are now, we received 3 bids, but there's probably 4, maybe 5, depending on how you count it, regional serving nonprofit housing providers in BC, which is very different than the case back then. So McCullough would have been around at the time, but they wouldn't have had the capacity to put in a proposal. Catalyst wasn't around. The other organization that bid, New Commons, they weren't around. There's another outfit in Vancouver that started up. They weren't really in the game. So the landscape has changed a little bit, which creates a good opportunity for us now. June through August, we did the sale of the Sea Otter home. In December, Catalyst presented the feasibility study for Sharp Road, and the board selected, looking at difference between a home ownership option, a rental option, clearly identified what was our preferred rental model. And in my report, I talk about we're at approximately a 14-unit project, rents 15 to 20% below market, mixed bedroom types from 1 bedroom to 2 bedroom plus den. Maybe we could put a 3 bedroom in there, but we're not sure we want to do that. On DL114, we spent the summer and fall resolving technical challenges and impediments. Those being wetlands, topography, so how do we get our road grades to not exceed district norms, fire flows, I think we're very close to solving that. We did a geotech, preliminary geotech, not wanting to go too far in our design until we were sure what was under the ground in terms of the type of rock and material that we had to work with. So January 2019, we were able to confirm with the district what was going to be our civil design criteria. And I highlight in my report what are some of those key aspects. A big decision, a game-changing decision that has emerged since I started is, one, the MRDT online provider platform, the ability to use that on affordable housing, and your decision to take advantage of that here in Tofino, and your decision to commit that funding to THC for this year and hopefully for foreseeable years. That's a game-changing decision, to have that kind of base funding that we can use both for operations, but hopefully as much as possible for capital contributions to our projects. We just got in March our civil design and costing, and in January, as we talked about earlier, you confirming that you'll back the loan guarantee, although you still have a final decision to make on that upcoming. So that's where you were and where we've been. Just really quickly wanted to highlight the plan. So this is Sharp Road. Maybe most of you are looking this way, so I'll turn around. Let's see if I can get this working.
Pointer will work on the television.
Pointer doesn't work. There you go. So I'll come over here. So the first plans and the ones we presented at the forum had the driveway on this side of the property, so closer to the highway. We've switched it to the other side. in part because of comments made by the neighbors, and in part thinking through that one of our options for accommodating vehicles is to have some on-street parking on the far side of Sharp Road, so that would be the north side of the road. And with the driveway there, then you create a turnaround option to make that work. It means a little bit of a longer driveway, but not a big difference in our estimation in the costs. And because of where our various riparian setback requirements are, it actually is a bit more of a functional layout with the parking by having it on that side. So a bit of a win for everyone. Right now it's a 14 unit design, a mix of units, and in the I didn't send you because they're still draft and I didn't want to make this seem too real yet because this is going to change 100%. You know, there's a mix of stacked units and double units. So on this, the bigger building has more double units and the one at the end has more stacked units. For the CMHC funding, we're making sure we have at least 3 accessible units because that's one of their project requirements. And then a mix of sizes to accommodate both, you know, couples, maybe a few singles, but as well families or families to be, depending on the kind of people who end up renting. Any questions on Sharp Road? So I'll switch to DL 114 quickly. So this again is pretty similar to what we put out in June of 2018. The buildings have moved around a bit. The road's in a slightly different configuration. It took surprisingly long to get here, but I'm happy we took the time. I think every change we've made has been some improvements. This latest version was one of the staff at McElhaney. We had a more kind of straight road configuration, and she's like, yeah, if we do this, I think we can get our road grades down and be more efficient. So this is where we've ended up. Key features of the design are having on-street parking on one side of the road all the way up as much as we can. Staying out of the wetland, having open ditches except where we have lots of driveway crossings. In our next phase, one of the things that Catalyst will be doing is considering whether we're going to actually have those townhouse sites or whether we're going to consolidate all the units into, you know, one or two building sites rather than having them spread out like that. One of my preoccupations has been how we have so little good development areas along, you know, ideally you have a straight road either side, you get lots of building lots, and so for every meter of sidewalk and pavement and sewer lines and water lines, you're building units and density off of them to help pay for that. Whereas you can see we have a wetland, we have steep slopes, we have areas where we just can't really develop, and so that makes our road and our water lines and everything a little bit longer than would be ideal. We've estimated the cost of this about 1.5 million for the civil component, and that's before we start developing our sites. And right now we're talking around 55 to 67 units for this site at 1.5 million, add on another million or so for the development sites. But on the Sharp Road side, we're at about 700,000 for that same kind of development costs for 14 units. So we're just in a very high cost environment. And one of my first things I did when I started with THC was to look around. Do we have better land? Where's that flat piece of land for our sewer lagoon or for affordable housing? And it doesn't really exist in anywhere. So we're left with what we've got. And these numbers aren't too bad in the great scheme of things. We're looking at supporting roughly 50 to 60,000 per unit in servicing costs, both on-site and off-site. And if you think that in some communities we might be spending $30,000, $40,000 a unit just on land purchasing, we're not too far off a good formula that funders aren't going to walk away from. So this is a graphic I showed again in 2017. So, you know, it's a small list, but it's a decent list of what are our affordable housing agreements. A need, massive need here. Market failure, we've talked about that. We have land, which not all communities can say they have land. We have a provider, so you started up the THC again. Supportive policy, you have an OCP that says we want housing on DL 114. Sharp Road, on the other hand, is called out as a science park or technology park. So that will be both a rezoning and an OCP amendment. So you'll have to turn your mind to whether it's an appropriate land use change, given the surrounding uses and those kind of things. But at the moment, the OCP doesn't support 14 units of housing in that location. And then I have down here a thumbs down on operating subsidy, because until this last funding call from BC Housing, they were not providing operating subsidies. What does an operating subsidy do? It allows you to flex your rent to people's income. So instead of having a budget that says I need to collect $850 rent to help pay the mortgage and my operating expenses, I can easily rent to somebody who might pay me $700 or might pay me $900, just depending on what their income is. Of course, if they pay you $900, that's great, but if they only pay you $700, how do you service your operations and debt? And so they're now back in the game of operating subsidies. In this recent funding call, they want providers to sign 60-year operating agreements. So they would provide a commitment to funding for 60 years to operate these units. Or what actually they want is a 60-year commitment from the operator to provide it at these rents, and they'll provide an operating subsidy for a certain period of time. And no one really knows, because they haven't released their operating agreement, what that means. Will they actually provide funding for 60 years, or at some point are you as the operator needing to cover that? And that's, I mean, it's a small point, but a very big point in the sort of conversation between a provider like ourselves or Catalyst and the provincial government. So that's now changed to they've got that. So we've been working on project plans. There's never one project plan. It gets better and better and different each iteration, and that's the process we're in until we actually build. There will always be changes to the project plan. Budget, we've done preliminary budgets for both Sharp Road and DL 114, and again we go through an iterative process of, and I think you've all seen these in your sewer projects or road projects. They get more refined, and hopefully the price doesn't go up too much because we're holding sufficient contingencies, but that's always the worry. On Sharp Road, we've specified what we think the rents are, what the formula between rent and capital, and in that case we're projecting about $1 million equity gap. So that's that subsidized nonprofit thing I talked about earlier. We need about $1 million at the building stage to be able to cover the debt that we expect from the rents and what it's going to cost us to operate over time. Where does that money come from? On that project, we're really targeting a combination of district funding, CMHC funding, as well as potential for social equity funding. And at some point, we'll be back to you, Council, with our proposal on what the funding formula is. At our board meeting today, we were talking about the fact that it's a strategic process. CMHC wants you to put in as much as you can. The province wants you to put in as much as you can. You want the province to put in as much as they can. And you have many projects like this where there's this sort of dance and negotiation. And so we try to put forward the best application we can with an expectation that there's going to potentially be some give and take. And so in this case, what are you putting in? Land. Excellent. You have a DCC bylaw that provides for a 50% waiver for affordable housing. I haven't actually done a check to see whether our Sharp Road project meets the definitions of your bylaw, but if it doesn't, I hope there'll be willingness to amend it so that at least the housing we provide there can attain that waiver, so we can count that. You've already put in about $100,000 to Sharp Road in terms of pre-development funding. And we've allocated some of the MRDT money from this year for more of our design work. And then the question is there more capital funding that you would put in, and where might that come from? And at the THC level, we've said potentially more MRDT money next year when we actually need to put in capital money. Excuse me, or potentially some of the money from your affordable housing reserve. There's still money in there after the Sea Otter sale. And you have one more unit that could be used in that same way to raise money for other affordable housing work. So that's an example of how you might gather the money together to make the right kind of capital contribution. On DL 114, our strategy includes potential to sell some sites to to raise money for capital contributions. But again, it just depends on what the government program is like and whether we need that money. And so it's a game of poker, you know, we hold our cards close to our chest as long as we can to try to maximize the investment from other communities. I just said all that in the capital funding question. So our next steps, both projects we're looking to initiate the rezoning and sooner than later. So Sharp Road will be May, June, DL 114, June, July. And then we have on our project plan for this year a series of 2 dialogues and work in the community with businesses and other agencies around seasonal staff accommodation and what role is the right role for THC to play in future years on staff accommodation, whether that's providing accommodation, whether that's keeping an inventory, whether that's holding annual meetings. I'm not sure what that looks like, but what role would THC play and what is the business model on that? And so right now in our budget we have $30,000 of the MRDT money to cover off our work on seasonal staff accommodation for next year. And then in future years, that decision will have to keep being made as to how much of a priority is it for the housing corporation to be involved in that activity. And at some point there may be difficult decisions. We need $200,000 for this capital project versus $50,000 to keep this program going. You know, what's the right choice to be making? So that was a quick rundown on where we are, or where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. I'm happy to take any questions. I don't know if I can grab a glass of water. I wasn't clever enough to have one.
Any questions, Joanne?
I'm wondering, on District Lot 114, some of the steep slopes, and I just noticed like on the first section that the district sold off, Leighton Way and Peterson. I think those are the names of the streets. Some of the lots that were sold are on very steep steep chunks of land, and I'm wondering if some of these steep slopes, if we could create lots possibly just for sale that would help subsidize the whole project.
Yeah, and that's a potential way of getting those capital contributions. I had in the work that I do, as well as sort of liaising with colleagues, multiple times colleagues have said, don't ever sell land. Marla Zook from Whistler Housing Corporation, reviewed a bunch of the work we did. Don't sell land, hold on to your land. So that's been kind of our principal strategy, is let's hold on to our land as long as we can. So kind of the last thing we do is sell land to raise money, because we'll never get that land back. So in our phase 1 plans to date, we don't have any lot sales identified, but quite quickly you can see, maybe this turns into a small lot, but you can see it's not as big as the one next door. Maybe we get a couple, 2 or 3 lots out of this side. So there's some natural places that might happen. The question always is, well, how much money will we get for that? So if we've serviced to the street line that lot, what can we sell it for? Versus if we've now graded that lot. In the budgeting I was doing, I was assuming somewhere between 100 and 150,000 net on a lot. So if we could do that, that would be great. If we can do better, fantastic, but I'm not very confident in that. So it means a lot of lots we have to sell to raise, money, and that's why the reluctance to give it away to sell it very quickly.
I'm thinking of the one fairly steep slope as it comes in that doesn't identify anything on it that I can see. It might just be steep, but it kind of looks comparable to the other slopes, just from the...
Yeah, I'm only showing a portion of DL 114 here.
Yeah.
There is some land of DL 114 off of 4th Avenue, up past the school there. And we did, I have let it be known that we would sell it, if someone wanted it, and I had not found any takers for it because it's steep, gnarly land to develop. And I've had a number of developers say to me, I'm not sure I'll touch that piece of property, just because it's not, like even this piece of property, just because it's kind of there's no sewer, you have to build roads, it's quite a, in their world, it's, in a private development, perspective, it's quite a high cost environment with not some of the benefits that you might get from other properties, with views and things, so. But anyway, it's on our radar, and it may become part of our solution, and our business plan calls for 40% of DL114 to be sold versus 60 to be retained for affordable housing, so we get a mix. But exactly when that happens or how that plays out is yet to be determined. That would be an ongoing decision-making process for the Housing Corporation Board.
On both projects, are they all going to be for sale, or are there a mix of rental?
So for Sharp Road, we're targeting rental, and for DL114, that has been our anticipation as well, that it's going to be rental. Right now, there is no funding program that provides any kind of subsidy for affordable home ownership. We did look at Sharp Road, whether we could make the numbers work, just with, and it was going to be close, to be honest with you, whether we can make the numbers work, but some trepidation about delivering 14 units in a kind of just a new market type, that much. The Sea Otter sale, we had 10 people, 9 or 10 applications for it. So if we're going to develop 14 units and sell them all, we need 40, 50 interested parties. And if the numbers are kind of right on the cusp, I think that the rental approach is a huge need and a much better first project for the Housing Corporation. Whether we integrate any affordable housing units into DL114, I keep saying it's a possibility, but I think it's more than likely, at least as a first project, to be rental.
Last question that I have. What's the height on it? Are we looking at any varying the height on this project or the other one?
So DL114 has, on most of this site, has zoning in place for medium density. To be honest, I don't remember what the zoning says is the height restriction. We're looking right now at 3 stories for these 2 larger buildings. That's what we're contemplating at the moment. But as we get costs in and as other people poke at it, that may change. But at the moment, we're contemplating 3-story buildings there. And Sharp Road, 2 stories. I mean, honestly, Sharp Road, we don't have enough space to go higher than 2 stories because of parking.
Okay. Let's just go around the table. Councillor Stere?
I'm fine. I think there was a couple. There was just one that we're far down the road from it. I was just curious, within the planning for the larger DL114, I know it's a long way away, is there on-site manager in that thought process with that many units?
Probably not, no. So it would be a 24-hour property management, so someone on call, but not expecting to have an on-site manager.
Mayor Osborne? Councillor Quaid? No?
Okay.
Councillor
Yeah,
Bennett?
just apologies, I had my phone turned off and then I wanted to do a calculation on the per door cost
Okay.
again and turned it back on again thinking I wouldn't get a call. So sorry about that and about my response to the call. Yeah, just what, can't we do it any faster?
Yeah.
Okay, if there's no more questions or comments, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for
Thanks,
having
Ian.
me.
Have a
Yeah.
safe drive.
Thanks, Ian.
Any unfinished business? I suspect not.
Oh, we had
Yes? Okay, moving on to business initiated by council members. We have 9.1, historical exclusion of Japanese Canadians on the west coast. A verbal report by Mayor Osborne.
Verbal report with pictures. Hey, look at that. Okay, so this is something that's been an ongoing discussion, particularly for Councillor Bart and I, in talking with some of the community members about the history of motions that were made by past Tofino councils regarding Japanese Canadians. And so there's been quite a bit of work that's done to kind of unearth this story, and I'm just going to shortly tell you the story that's emerged and a suggestion for moving forward. But I don't think I need to go into any of the history of Pearl Harbor and Canadian government decisions to remove the Japanese and turn them, take away property, dispossess them of all of their belongings, so I won't go into that. But I can't even imagine what the culture of the time must have been like, but on January 24th, 1947, Tofino Council did pass this resolution. The Commissioners of the Corporation of the Village of Tofino hereby resolve that at the request of the residents of the Village of Tofino, all Orientals be excluded completely from this municipality and shall be prevented from owning property or carrying on business directly or indirectly within the municipality. Then a couple of years later, or not, Elise can be my, thank you. Oh, sorry. A couple of years later, on April 19th, 1949, it's not quite written as a moved and seconded in resolution, but it does appear in the minutes that the Tofino Council asked the clerk to write to B.C. Bracewell, who was the equivalent of the Minister of Municipalities at the time, to ask if a bylaw could be made to exclude Orientals from buying or owning property within the municipality. And so Elise has been really helpful, and we've done a lot of work and contacted the province, etc., over the past couple of years to find out that no bylaw was ever created. So there's no bylaw on the records, but there was some question about whether it had happened or not. And Dorothy Arnett had come to Dorothy and I a few years ago, 2014, to ask us to really please make sure completely, absolutely, that this bylaw didn't exist, and it doesn't. So with the Pacific Rim Art Society this year, their Cultural Heritage Festival focuses on Japanese Canadian history and the history and culture of the Japanese families and people who lived here in the Tofino-Euclid area back in the 20s to the 40s. And it came up, this whole discussion came up again, and I reached out with, after talking to Ellen Crow Swords, her maiden name was Komodo, from the Komodo family, put me in contact with somebody from UVic and started this whole process of discussing with the National Association of Japanese Canadians and a couple of other associations that I'll tell you about in a moment, to ask, kind of like, what do we do now? Obviously this needs to be addressed and the correct steps need to be taken. And the response was very positive and encouraging, and they gave a lot of advice. But then it turns out that in 1997, Sada Sato bought property on Lynn Road, 1277 Lynn Road, and he was building a house, and he is Japanese, and he recalled these discussions that took place and knew that there was something on the books and wasn't too sure what the status of things was. So at the time, he inquired with the district, and he because they unearthed the resolutions, and then Rolly Arnett and Larry Nicolay put forward the motion, and so I'll just read it out, moved by Councillors Arnett and Nicolay, that while noting that no evidence at this time indicates the resolution regarding Orientals of 1947 was ever voted or passed, this council wishes to set the record straight by rescinding the resolution regarding Orientals and emphasize that the District of Tofino rejects any exclusionary policy based on racial or ethnic origin. This was put into a letter, and the CAO at the time, Charles Hamilton, sent the letter to Sada, and I think with that, Sada considered the matter to be closed, and he built a house and everything was fine. So the motion has been rescinded by Tofino Council, and I have relayed all of this to the people that I've been in touch with, and I've asked them for any advice that they have in terms of if there are any further steps to be taken, or is this matter essentially considered closed. The City of Victoria and the City of Vancouver both had similar resolutions on their books, and they went through processes of rescinding or apologizing in the case of the City of Vancouver. And there are a few other municipalities in BC that I suspect do have something similar on their books, and I can't find any evidence that they've ever undertaken anything. But what I have agreed to do with the National Association of Japanese Canadians is to write a letter that explains this timeline and everything that took place, and then just leave the offer with them. If there's anything else that you would like the District of Tofino to do, or if you have any advice for us, just to let us know. And then what they will do is make sure that they disperse that to the rest of all of their chapters. And this would also include, there's the Central Vancouver Island Japanese Canadian Cultural Society, the Victoria Nikkei Cultural Society, and then the National Association itself. So that's all I wanted to let you know about, and find out if you had any questions, and I'll make sure you get a copy of the letter and then tell you what the dates of the Cultural Heritage Festival are for Prass. So there you go.
Any questions?
No, except to say I appreciate the follow-up work both from Indies and
It's been very interesting.
Mayor Osborne.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
One question I have is, the resolution refers to Orientals, and you keep on talking about Japanese.
Yeah, well, I don't know, and I've asked them to, if they have any feedback of other places that would want to be known, and that's a good question. So, I don't know of other.
I mean, if we got to
I'm
the
sure there are. So.
if we got to the stage of issuing
Yeah.
an apology, I think we should be apologising to everybody.
Agreed. And I'm not sure that that's expected. So I don't know, but I don't know. So I'm seeking guidance from them. But yeah. Thank you.
Okay, if there's no further questions, we'll move on to section 9.2, council discussion regarding change of meeting times. Councillor Stere.
Yeah, this has come up, fortunately, well, since October, I have been not working at my regular job. I'm now going back. My work schedule is such that I'm 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, and that my time of work is from 8 to 4, which would, on going through the calendar on councils on Tuesdays, would exclude me from attending council meetings based on that. And in discussion with my people in Victoria, there was, and a change of administration at our local station, there was some reluctance previous to this. There would have been no problem. There has been a change of personnel, and there is some reluctance, to put it mildly, to me attending, could be up to 2-3 hours of a work day to attend council. That being said, I'm still in discussion, but as it sounds, I would propose that and we have talked with a few people, that we could have a discussion around amending the times to a 4:30 or 4 o'clock start. And there was some discussion about possibly having that as a successive, so one council meeting on a Tuesday to be and then a subsequent one at the 10 a.m. I hadn't gone through my work schedule to see how that would all fit in, but and the other part of that, so that's the personal end of it, and then the other part, to somewhat justify it, was the thought that if those meeting times, and I know historically council had later start times, if those later start times are more conducive to a further public input, or the ability for the public to attend council meetings after a work day. So I just wanted to open that up for discussion to see if there was some possibility for that at this stage.
Any comments?
Those times are better for me, but I know that's not the case for everybody necessarily. I can make it work, whatever, but definitely would prefer the later ones, just so I'm not missing work. But I can go with whatever works best for everyone.
Staff, what the implications are for staff costs? Any?
Yeah, just sort of
back of envelope, thinking about this over the weekend, it's less than $5,000. I mean, if we think that we might have a staff person or two that we would be paying overtime for a few hours each evening. And most of our staff are pretty flexible, so the staff that have to be here, so managers as well as our confidential secretary are not within the bargaining unit, so we can adjust our working hours. It's planners, bylaw officers that would have to be here. So yeah, I would say considerably less than $5,000 in terms of cost.
I've been through 3 time changes. I mean, what's a predetermined factor for? Well, when I first got on council, we were meeting at night, and then we went to the daytime, and then we went back to night. Well, no, the other way around, but you know, so 3. So I mean, what's the premise for setting times?
What's the premise of setting
Well,
times?
I mean, last time we did all those switches for the public,
Yeah.
and now we're talking about switching it for a member of council.
There are a couple of things to consider, and one is a bit of a sort of a longer consideration, but you know, the public being available, the public being able to attend, and the experience that I've heard is just what Councillor McMaster said, which is it hasn't seemed to make a difference one way or the other. And I don't know, not having had night council meetings or evening council meetings or late afternoon council meetings here. The other consideration is who would be available to run for council, who could potentially run for council, and I'll choose my words carefully here, but you end up with a particular demographic when the meetings are during the day, and it changes. I mean, the hours that people work in this town are different, but normally councils, and except in the biggest municipalities, do have their meetings in the evenings, so that one enables the public to attend, but also more likely enables a broader spectrum of people to run for council. So there is that to consider. I don't know how that would play out in a kind of in a resort service sector economy town, but that's something for council maybe to turn its mind to.
Any other questions?
I'll just say, it's not my preference, but I understand the need to accommodate all the members around the table here. I would be more open to 4 o'clock starting time than the 7 o'clock that we've done in the past. I found that was kind of you get tired at some point halfway through a meeting, about an hour or 2 minutes or less into it, whereas you have more energy to apply yourself to the meeting in the earlier part of the day. Afternoon can also be sort of a lull in the day. So there's when we had the 7 o'clock meetings, I recall a lot of times the meetings were kind of rushed towards the end just to get through the agenda, and so I don't think that's the best decision-making way of doing it. So I think 4 o'clock should be able to get through. But my preference is the day meetings. I think it's better for staff as well. Yeah. So the other question I would have, if you're 2 on and 2 off, that's not. I'm wondering if there's a way we could fit our meetings in your off periods. That's another consideration. We'd end up having them every 3rd week or so. I don't know. I don't know if you've looked into that. Can't imagine quite how it would work, but you might be a way to work it that way.
I did quickly look at it. It gets complex to try to schedule in those off period times. That's the quicker, easier solution was that time frame of a 4 o'clock start.
And you're always a Monday to Friday worker?
No, it's Tuesday to Tuesday.
move our meetings to Mondays.
Well, I would still be working Monday,
Tuesday.
It's 14 days in a row. 14 days off.
It definitely, like, if we were to go evening today, like, alternating would be better for me, because I work at night. That's definitely, it does cost me to be here rather than there. So alternating would be great, and 4 o'clock starts would be great. That would be my vote for sure.
My understanding, if it starts at 4, you would be late because you don't get off, but only 2 minutes.
Yeah, I think probably
You could slip out.
I could slip
It's a
out.
bit loose there, isn't it? I've noticed. Okay, so the only thing is, like Councillor...
It depends on the
Depends on who's
the president, it depends on who is in the present administration.
Like Councillor Anderson, I'm absolutely not interested in meetings. I just don't
Either
think
am I.
they're very good for good decision making, and, you know, not hugely concerned about the staff, the cost implications, but it is a factor. But I think it's, the principle is that we work to accommodate that schedule that works for all councillors. So I'd accept that. Alternating it, you know, apparently would be ideal. How, you know, the public evening, day, but, you know, we've said, let's try it out and see if there's more participation, or, you know, why not?
Fluent does alternating meetings now.
Oh, yeah,
I
okay,
think they
there
have
you
one during
go.
the day and one in the evening.
There's
Sort of. They do
Yeah.
2:30 and
Yeah.
4:30.
Yeah.
Moses.
I also think that if we could tailor, like, if it was possible to tailor agendas so more public, like, items on the agenda that would have more public interest were later in the day, that might be valuable as well. Like, if that's possible, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know how we would do
I
it
don't
though,
know.
because it's bizarre who wants to know what, but I guess some stuff is obvious, but some stuff is
Some stuff would be less.
Yeah.
But,
I was going to suggest that staff get together with Councillor Stere and try and come up with a schedule considering alternating and 4 o'clock start. And then present that to Council.
Another thing is, and Bob has talked to us about this before, about doing the in-camera session before the meeting. And so when we do the 4 o'clock starts, that we do a half an hour in-camera session, and that if he arrives a few minutes late, that's kind of less of a big deal. And that we do a 4:30 meeting start. I mean, given the way we've been going, I don't see many instances where we would not be done by 7 anyways. I mean, we've had good meeting legs. And that lets Andrea get back to work.
Yeah, and then we all have to walk over to her restaurant for dinner.
Pretty much.
Sure, take reservations.
My only concern about that is so many times we've had a short meeting and then it's in camera, that sideswipes you.
Sometimes, but not, I don't think as often as
And I mean, we can
lately.
figure out the times, but we could start the in-camera meeting, and of course it could be
Paused.
adjourned or paused, and then completed at the after the open part of the meeting ends.
Could we do a 4:05 start?
I think that's a bit odd.
I like
Like the school at 8:38 is when the school day starts.
starting with the in-camera and
Maybe
you
another
know,
thing that made Tofino very sad.
adjourning to the end of the regular meeting if we need to.
Yeah, I'm game to try my, I don't really do that great after 7 or 8, so I'm good to make sure we're done by then.
Yeah.
you guys, that's when I really sparkle.
I won't
We shall
see you
live in
at the
hope.
beach at 6 a.m. That's great.
Just one more comment that now that the meetings are taped and they're available to view, that I think that being meeting at a time in the evening is less of an issue than it was at one time.
So I guess the next time we're all together is after, those are together going to ABSCC. Is everybody going except, or Al, are you going?
I haven't
Not
quite
quite.
figured it out yet,
We
but
have 2 council
at this point, I'm still going.
I hope I'm gonna see y'all on Wednesday.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, yeah, that's right, Wednesday and Friday, is it Friday? Yeah. Right, I forgot about it.
So do we need to make a motion for that? Or,
I'd suggest staff come up with a schedule. Back to council.
Yeah. I don't think, I mean, I'm sure that Tom
I
will
think
talk
we
to
got the
Lisa.
message.
Yeah. Do you need a motion to,
I
I mean,
think
we're in Cal, so
ideally we should have, yeah, I
This
mean,
is
this
gonna require
recommends it.
bylaw
Bylaw
amendment,
change,
so-
council,
Yes.
okay, so Cal recommend, I'll move then, that Cal recommend that council, I don't know, that council direct staff to amend the meeting
Procedures bylaw.
procedures bylaw to,
So we're starting at 4 PM with the in-camera session first? Is that what I've heard?
yeah, but only once a month, and then the other time of the month would still be the 10 a.m. start.
Okay,
I can't formulate that right now into
That's okay.
coherent.
as long as I understand, it's an alternating schedule.
Yeah, to
One meeting
amend
to
the,
start at 4 PM, one meeting to start at 10 AM.
correct.
Still 2 meetings a month on the second and fourth Tuesdays.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
changing.
the meeting is actually starting at 4:30 if we do the in-camera first.
The meeting starts at 4 and then you'll
camera's
close
part of the
it?
meeting.
Oh, that's right,
Yeah.
sorry. Oh, I thought I was gonna have to set.
But as long
at
as I've
least
understood that.
Should we make it something that like the first meeting is the earliest and the second meeting is the
I
late
think that's the
one?
part they gotta work out, so
Yes.
it's
Yes.
that descriptive.
Conversation.
Okay.
So the miracle of editing.
So
That
that
was
sense.
apparently a messy motion review.
So that was a motion of sorts.
Second.
See, it's 7:20, I told you.
Any discussion before I call a vote? All those in favour? Any opposed? Motion carried. Question period? No. Okay, motion to adjourn.
So,
Thank you, everybody.
now you can go to your next.
Now I can go to the PAC meeting.
Bye-bye.
Oh,
Shut up.
Yeah.
That was the council.
Okay, so I should ask, do you want to